The scent of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the distant hum of laughter, the clinking of cutlery against porcelain plates punctuating the low murmur of conversations. Clara wiped her hands on the faded apron tied around her waist, its edges frayed from countless shifts in the upscale bistro where she worked. It was her domain and her prison, a small stage where the city's wealthy performed their routines of affluence, while she played the invisible supporting cast. Her dreams, once vibrant and unyielding, now lay dormant beneath the weight of bills and responsibilities. The allure of money was everywhere, but none of it ever found its way into her hands. She noticed the table in the corner, a cluster of young elites seated in designer clothes, their laughter sharp and careless. Among them was Beatrice, a socialite notorious for her biting wit and insatiable hunger for attention. Clara had seen her many times before, her aura exuding the effortless confidence of someone who never had to question the stability of her finances. Beatrice's voice rang out, loud and pointed, drawing the attention of everyone nearby. "Clara, isn't it?" Beatrice said, her tone honeyed with condescension. "Could you bring us another bottle of your finest champagne? Oh wait, do you even know what that is?" The table erupted in laughter, a cruel symphony of mockery that made Clara's cheeks burn with humiliation. Clara clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms as she held back the sharp retort on the tip of her tongue. She couldn't afford to lose this job. Not now, not when the electricity bill was overdue and the whispers of eviction were growing louder. For a moment, she glanced at the other patrons, hoping someone would intervene, but their gazes slid away, unwilling to disrupt their own comfort. It was a moment that carved itself into her soul, leaving a scar she couldn't yet understand. As Clara walked away to fetch the order, she felt the hot sting of tears welling up. She hated herself for feeling powerless, for being trapped in a life dictated by the lack of money. In the corner of her mind, a voice whispered, "This isn't forever. It doesn't have to be." But how? The weight of her reality seemed too heavy to lift. Later that evening, as she scrubbed the counters and cleared the empty glasses, her mind replayed the scene over and over. Each laugh, each word, seared into her memory. She wondered what it must feel like to live like Beatrice, to never have to calculate how much was left in the bank before buying a loaf of bread. Was it freedom? Or did wealth come with its own shackles, unseen but equally constraining? Clara caught her reflection in the smudged glass of the bistro door. Her tired eyes and the defeated slope of her shoulders made her feel like a stranger to herself. "This isn't the end," she whispered, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions within. "One day I'll show them. I'll show everyone." Before turning off the lights, she paused. If you've ever felt underestimated or dreamed of rewriting your story, tell me in the comments. Maybe your journey will inspire someone else just as I hope mine will. Stepping into the cool night air, Clara felt the first flicker of resolve ignite within her. It was a fragile flame, born of anger and desperation, but it was there. She didn't know how, and she didn't know when, but she would change her life. The laughter of the elites still echoed in her ears, but this time it sounded less like ridicule and more like a challenge. The apartment smelled of damp walls and stale air. Clara slid the key into the lock, its metallic groan breaking the silence of the dimly lit hallway. Inside, the single-room space was as uninspiring as the day she moved in. The peeling wallpaper and second-hand furniture felt like physical manifestations of her stalled life. She kicked off her shoes and collapsed onto the worn couch, staring at the ceiling as her thoughts swirled like a storm. The humiliation from the bistro replayed in her mind on a loop. Beatrice's laughter wasn't just cruel. It was a reminder of every opportunity Clara had missed, every setback she had endured. It wasn't just the lack of money. It was the lack of control, the feeling of being a spectator in her own life while others thrived effortlessly. As the minutes stretched into hours, Clara's thoughts deepened into a simmering determination. She pulled out a notebook, one she hadn't touched in years, its pages yellowed but still intact. It had once been filled with ideas, plans, dreams of a life that seemed just out of reach. Tonight she opened to a blank page and wrote one word at the top: change. For Clara, change was no longer optional. It was survival. She started listing everything she could control, even if it felt minuscule. She could save more, she could find better paying work, she could invest in herself, learn something new. The idea of rebuilding her life felt overwhelming, but it also sparked the first glimmers of hope. For the first time in years, Clara allowed herself to imagine a future where she wasn't defined by her financial struggles. The next morning, she woke with a clarity she hadn't felt in months. Her first step would be practical. As much as her pride screamed against it, Clara resolved to ask for extra shifts at the bistro. More hours meant more money, and she needed every penny to escape this cycle. At work, the manager barely looked up from his clipboard when she made her request. Extra shifts? We'll see. I'll let you know if we need someone. His tone was dismissive, and Clara bit back her frustration. This wasn't the time to let anger cloud her purpose. After her shift, she stayed behind to clean tables, scrubbing harder than necessary to vent her emotions. A familiar voice interrupted her thoughts. "You don't seem like the type to give up easily." Clara turned to see Lucas, a regular customer at the bistro. He was unassuming, always tipping generously and asking polite questions about her day. Tonight, his gaze lingered a moment longer, as if he could sense the weight she carried. "Giving up isn't an option," she replied, forcing a small smile. Lucas nodded thoughtfully. "Good. If you ever need advice, or just someone to talk to, let me know." He slid a business card across the table. Clara hesitated before taking it, her fingers brushing the embossed text. She didn't know why, but his presence felt different tonight, less transactional, more personal. As she walked home, Clara turned the card over in her hands. It read simply, "Lucas Grant, consultant." She couldn't fathom why someone like him would offer help to someone like her. But the gesture lingered in her mind, a small reminder that not everyone saw her as invisible. That night, Clara dove headfirst into research. Her old laptop whirred loudly as she sifted through free online courses, tutorials, and forums. The world of finance, personal development, and entrepreneurship unfolded before her eyes. It was intimidating, but it also felt like a map, a way out. Days turned into weeks, and Clara's routine shifted. She worked her shifts at the bistro with renewed focus, but her nights were spent learning. She discovered the basics of budgeting and saving, marveling at how small changes could have a significant impact. The world of money, which had always seemed elusive and out of reach, now felt like a puzzle she could solve piece by piece. Her transformation wasn't dramatic yet, but there was a subtle shift in how she carried herself. At the bistro, her colleagues began to notice. She walked with a quiet determination, her head held a little higher, and when Beatrice appeared again, Clara's reaction surprised even herself. This time, Beatrice didn't mock her outright. Instead, she offered a dismissive glance, as if Clara weren't even worth acknowledging. But Clara saw something else in Beatrice's expression, an unease, a flicker of recognition that she couldn't quite place. For the first time, Clara didn't feel small in her presence. She felt steady. That night, Clara sat in her apartment, the notebook open on her lap. She flipped back to the page where she had written "change" weeks ago. Beneath it, she added another word: momentum. Her life was still far from what she envisioned, but the pieces were slowly starting to align. And for the first time in years, She felt a sense of control. The future stretched before her, uncertain and vast, but within that uncertainty lay possibility, and Clara was ready to chase it. The sound of typing filled the air, punctuated by the occasional scrape of a chair against the wooden floor. Clara sat at her makeshift desk, a tiny corner of her apartment now dedicated to her growing ambitions. A lamp illuminated the small space, casting a warm glow over stacks of notes, financial guides, and her laptop. The once daunting world of money management had become her obsession, a puzzle she was determined to solve piece by piece. Each new piece of knowledge felt like reclaiming a part of herself she had long forgotten. Her days were relentless. She worked double shifts at the bistro, often returning home exhausted, her feet aching and her back tight with strain. But she refused to let fatigue dictate her life anymore. Every evening she immersed herself in lessons, budgeting, investing, personal branding, each concept building on the last. Slowly, the chaos of her life began to take shape. Her savings, though modest, started to grow. Clara found a quiet thrill in tracking her progress, each dollar earned feeling like a small victory. One afternoon, while clearing tables, her manager called her to the back office. Clara's stomach tightened. She couldn't afford any setbacks, not now, but instead of a reprimand, he handed her an envelope. "You've been working hard," he said gruffly. "Here's a little something extra." Clara's fingers trembled as she opened the envelope to find a bonus, a small amount, but significant enough to cover her overdue bills. Relief flooded her, but it wasn't just the money. It was validation, however small, that her efforts hadn't gone unnoticed. She pocketed the cash and returned to work, her spirits buoyed by the unexpected kindness. That evening, her routine was interrupted by a message on her phone. The name Lucas Grant lit up the screen. She had all but forgotten about his business card, tucked away in the pages of her notebook. His message was brief but intriguing. "Hope you're doing well. If you're still looking to change things up, I know someone hiring. Let me know." Clara stared at the screen, her mind racing. Was this genuine, or was it another reminder of her place in the world, dependent on the goodwill of others? She hesitated before typing a reply. "Thank you, I'm interested. What's the job?" The response came quickly. It was for an entry-level position at a small marketing firm, the kind of opportunity Clara had only dreamed of. She had no formal experience, but Lucas assured her that her work ethic and determination would carry weight. The conversation left her restless, equal parts excited and terrified. Could she really step into a world so far removed from the bistro? A week later, Clara found herself in a borrowed blazer and scuffed heels, seated in a sleek office for her interview. The hiring manager, a composed woman in her 40s, glanced over Clara's sparse resume. "Your experience isn't conventional," she said, "but I see potential." Clara held her breath. She had spent hours rehearsing her pitch, drawing on every ounce of confidence she could muster. "I've worked in customer service for years," she began. "It's taught me resilience, problem-solving, and how to connect with people. I know I have a lot to learn, but I'm willing to put in the work." The woman studied her for a moment before nodding. "We'll give you a trial period. Let's see what you can do." Walking out of the office, Clara felt like the ground beneath her had shifted. The job wasn't glamorous, and the pay wasn't much better than the bistro. But it was a start, a foothold in a world she had only glimpsed from the outside. It was proof that change wasn't just possible, it was happening. Her first days at the firm were overwhelming. The pace was fast, the jargon unfamiliar, and the expectations high. But Clara approached each task with the same determination that had carried her through sleepless nights and double shifts. She stayed late to review notes, asked questions even when she feared they might expose her inexperience, and took every piece of feedback as a chance to improve. Meanwhile, her presence at the firm didn't go unnoticed. Colleagues began to admire her dedication, and some even offered advice. But not everyone welcomed her warmly. A junior manager named Evelyn, sharp-eyed and ambitious, seemed to take a particular interest in undermining Clara. "You don't really belong here, do you?" she said one afternoon, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. "Marketing's a long way from waiting tables." Clara met her gaze steadily, refusing to flinch. "Everyone starts somewhere," she replied. The exchange left her shaken, but it also fueled her resolve. She had fought too hard to let someone else's judgment define her. One evening, as Clara worked late, she received an unexpected visitor. Lucas appeared in the doorway of her small office, holding 2 cups of coffee. "I figured you could use a break," he said with a smile. She accepted the cup, grateful for the gesture. "I don't know how you do it," she admitted. "This world feels different. Like I'm always one step behind." Lucas leaned against the desk, his expression thoughtful. "It's not about where you start, Clara. It's about where you're going. And trust me, you're heading in the right direction." His words stayed with her long after he left, echoing in the quiet of her apartment as she reviewed her notes for the next day. Clara was beginning to see that her journey wasn't just about money or status. It was about proving to herself that she was capable of more, that she could carve out a place in a world that had always felt beyond her reach. As the weeks passed, Clara began to find her rhythm at the firm. Each success, no matter how small, built on the last, forming the foundation of a future she had only dared to imagine. But the challenges ahead loomed larger than ever, and Clara knew her resolve would soon be tested in ways she couldn't yet foresee. The soft chime of the office clock marked the end of another day, but Clara's work was far from over. As her colleagues packed up their bags and drifted out the door, she remained at her desk, poring over spreadsheets and campaign notes. The marketing firm had become a battlefield where she fought daily to prove herself. Each task was an opportunity to push forward, and each mistake was a reminder of how far she still had to go. Tonight, however, her focus wavered. A simple email from Evelyn earlier in the day had left Clara unsettled. It wasn't the content, it was the tone, subtly undermining and laced with a hint of disdain. Evelyn had become a shadow in Clara's progress, lurking at the edges and waiting for a misstep. Clara couldn't understand why, but it was clear Evelyn saw her as a threat. By the time she locked up and stepped out into the crisp night air, Clara's thoughts had shifted from Evelyn to Beatrice. It had been weeks since their last encounter at the bistro, but Clara couldn't shake the memory of that dismissive glance. It wasn't the same open cruelty she had experienced before. It was something quieter, more calculating. Clara couldn't help but wonder if Beatrice had recognized her, or if she had simply decided she was no longer worth her time. Lost in thought, Clara didn't notice the figure waiting by her apartment building until she was only a few feet away. Lucas stood under the flickering streetlight, his expression unreadable. He held a thick manila envelope in one hand, his usual easy smile replaced by something more serious. "Lucas?" Clara's voice betrayed her surprise. "What are you doing here?" "I needed to talk to you," he said, stepping closer, "and I didn't want to do it over text." Clara hesitated before unlocking the door and leading him upstairs. Her apartment, while still modest, felt less suffocating now that she had begun making small improvements. A fresh coat of paint on the walls and a few second-hand pieces of furniture had transformed the space into something closer to a home. Lucas placed the envelope on the coffee table and gestured for her to open it. Inside were documents, articles, and photographs. Clara's hands trembled as she flipped through them, the pieces forming a picture she couldn't fully understand. "These are business reports?" she asked, her voice uncertain. "Not just any reports," Lucas replied. "They're tied to Beatrice's family." I thought you should know what kind of people you're dealing with. Clara frowned, scanning the papers more closely. The articles detailed financial scandals, shady investments, and lawsuits, all connected to the sprawling empire Beatrice's family controlled. It was a world of power and money, built on a foundation of lies and manipulation. "Why are you showing me this?" Clara asked, her tone sharper than she intended. "What do you expect me to do with it?" Lucas leaned back, his gaze steady. "Because I see the path you're on, Clara, and I don't want you to get blindsided. People like Beatrice play by a different set of rules. You need to understand that." Clara sat in silence, the weight of the information sinking in. For years she had envied Beatrice and her world of privilege, believing it to be untouchable. But now she saw cracks in the facade, evidence that even the wealthiest weren't immune to failure and corruption. "I don't want revenge," Clara said finally, her voice quiet but firm. "I'm not going to stoop to her level." Lucas nodded, a flicker of approval crossing his face. "Good, but that doesn't mean you can't protect yourself. Just be careful." After he left, Clara spent hours sorting through the documents, piecing together a picture of a world she had only glimpsed from afar. It wasn't just about Beatrice anymore. It was about understanding the system that had kept people like her struggling while others thrived. The more she read, the more determined she became to carve out her place, not through shortcuts or schemes, but through resilience and integrity. At work, Clara's focus sharpened. She began to see connections between her newfound knowledge and the project she was assigned. Her colleagues noticed her growing confidence, and even Evelyn, despite her antagonism, couldn't deny Clara's progress. But Clara's journey was far from linear. One afternoon, she was called into a meeting with the department head, a man whose stoic demeanor rarely betrayed his thoughts. He handed her a folder and gave her a task that left her both excited and terrified: to lead the next client pitch. It was an unprecedented opportunity for someone at her level, and Clara knew it was a test. As she prepared for the presentation, Clara felt the familiar pangs of doubt creeping in. The stakes were high, and failure wasn't an option. She worked tirelessly, refining her pitch late into the night. The pressure was immense, but so was her resolve. The day of the presentation arrived, and Clara stood before the conference room filled with executives. Her voice wavered at first, but as she spoke, she found her rhythm. She drew from her own experiences, weaving a narrative that resonated with the audience. By the time she finished, the room was silent, the weight of her words lingering in the air. As she walked back to her desk, Clara felt a rush of emotions: relief, pride, and a renewed sense of purpose. For the first time, she began to believe that she truly belonged. But deep down, she knew this was only the beginning. The challenges ahead would be greater, and the shadows of her past still lingered, waiting to resurface. The rain drummed against the office windows, a steady rhythm that mirrored Clara's pounding heart. She sat at her desk, staring at the glowing screen, her inbox open to an email that could change everything. It was from the firm's CEO, a name that carried weight in the industry. He had personally commended her recent pitch, calling it a refreshing perspective. The words should have filled her with pride, but instead they brought an unsettling mix of emotions. Clara had fought tooth and nail for every small victory, yet the acknowledgement felt surreal. She wasn't sure if she deserved it, or if it was just luck, a dangerous thought she pushed aside. Closing her laptop, she glanced around the nearly empty office. Most of her colleagues had left for the evening, but Evelyn lingered at her desk, her sharp eyes fixed on Clara. It wasn't the first time Evelyn had watched her with that calculating gaze. Later that night, Clara walked home under the dim glow of streetlights, the rain soaking through her jacket. Her thoughts were heavy, caught between pride in her accomplishments and the nagging fear that she was one misstep away from losing everything. She passed the bistro where she used to work and couldn't help but peer through the window. The sight of her former co-workers bustling about brought a pang of nostalgia and a reminder of how far she'd come. As she turned the corner toward her apartment, she stopped short. Standing by her door with an umbrella in hand was Beatrice. The sight of her in the rain, unbothered by the storm, felt almost surreal. Clara's stomach tightened as memories of humiliation flashed through her mind. "What are you doing here?" Clara asked, her voice steadier than she expected. Beatrice tilted her head, a faint smile playing on her lips. "I heard you've been moving up in the world. Thought I'd see for myself." Clara clenched her jaw. She didn't trust this sudden appearance, especially not the friendly tone. "How did you find me?" Beatrice shrugged. "I have my ways. Don't look so suspicious. I'm not here to ruin your life, Clara. In fact, I might have an opportunity for you." The words hung in the air, dripping with irony. Beatrice's offer felt like a trap, but curiosity gnawed at Clara. Despite her better judgment, she led Beatrice into her apartment, her instincts screaming that this was a mistake. Over a cup of hastily brewed tea, Beatrice leaned back in the worn armchair, her presence both commanding and invasive. "I'll cut to the chase," she said. "My family's business is restructuring. We're looking for fresh talent, someone who understands how to navigate both sides of the fence, so to speak." Clara frowned. The offer sounded too good to be true, and the timing was suspicious. "Why me?" "Let's just say you've caught some attention," Beatrice replied smoothly. "You've proven you can adapt. That's a valuable skill in our world." Clara couldn't ignore the temptation. This could be her chance to accelerate her career, to finally secure the financial stability she'd been chasing. But the memory of Lucas's warning echoed in her mind. People like Beatrice played by different rules, rules that could destroy someone like Clara. "I'll think about it," Clara said finally, her tone guarded. Beatrice smirked, as if she had already anticipated the response. "Take your time, but don't wait too long. Opportunities like this don't last forever." After Beatrice left, Clara sat alone in the dim light of her apartment, her thoughts a whirlwind. The offer lingered like a shadow, casting doubt over her next steps. She couldn't shake the feeling that accepting it would come with strings attached, strings that might pull her back into a world she was desperate to leave behind. The following day, Clara buried herself in work, hoping to push Beatrice's offer out of her mind. But the tension at the office was palpable. Evelyn's behavior had shifted, her usual jabs replaced by an unsettling silence. Clara couldn't tell if it was resignation or a brewing storm. As the week wore on, Clara began to notice something else. Her name was circulating among clients and higher-ups, her reputation growing beyond the confines of her department. The praise was intoxicating, but it also brought new pressures. She felt the weight of expectations bearing down on her, every decision scrutinized, every move calculated. One evening, as Clara prepared to leave, she found an anonymous envelope on her desk. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a photograph, and a note. The photograph was of her and Lucas, taken outside her apartment. The note read, "Careful who you trust." Her hands trembled as she stared at the image. Who had taken it? And what did they want? The unease she had been feeling for weeks now crystallized into a sharp fear. Someone was watching her, tracking her movements, and they wanted her to know. Clara left the office in a daze, the city's lights blurring around her. She couldn't shake the feeling that her past and present were colliding, the boundaries between them dissolving. Beatrice's offer, Evelyn's silence, the anonymous threat. They were all pieces of a puzzle she couldn't yet see. But one thing was clear. Her journey was no longer just about proving herself, it was about survival. The city skyline stretched before Clara, glittering like 1,000 promises. She stood on the balcony of the marketing firm's towering office building, gripping the railing as the cold wind bit at her skin. The weight of the photograph in her bag felt heavier than it should, its presence a constant reminder that someone, somewhere, was pulling strings she couldn't see. She replayed the events of the past weeks in her mind, searching for answers. Who would go to such lengths to unsettle her? Evelyn was a logical suspect, but the photograph suggested something deeper, something more insidious. And then there was Beatrice, with her cryptic offer and sudden interest in Clara's life. The lines between friend, foe, and opportunist blurred with each passing day. Inside the building, the office buzzed with energy. A major client pitch was underway, and Clara had been chosen to co-lead the presentation. It was a monumental opportunity, the kind that could cement her place in the firm. But Clara couldn't shake the unease that had settled over her since the photograph appeared. As the meeting began, Clara pushed her fears aside, focusing on the task at hand. She stood before a room of executives, her voice steady and her ideas clear. The presentation was a success, earning nods of approval from the clients and an appreciative glance from the department head. But as the applause faded and the room emptied, Clara caught a glimpse of Evelyn, lingering near the door, her expression unreadable. "You've been making quite a name for yourself," Evelyn said as she approached. Her voice was calm, almost pleasant, but there was a sharpness beneath the surface. It must feel good, proving everyone wrong. Clara met her gaze, unwilling to back down. "Hard work pays off," she replied evenly. Evelyn smiled faintly, but her eyes were cold. "Careful, though. Success attracts attention, and not all of it is good." The words felt like a warning, their meaning veiled but deliberate. Clara watched as Evelyn walked away, her heels clicking against the polished floor. The unease that had subsided during the presentation returned in full force, gnawing at the edges of her composure. Later that evening, Clara found herself at a quiet cafe, her thoughts spiraling. She needed clarity, a way to untangle the web of threats and opportunities that surrounded her. She pulled out the photograph again, examining it closely. There were no clues, no markings to indicate where it had come from, but the message, "Careful who you trust," kept replaying in her mind. Her phone buzzed, breaking her concentration. It was a text from Lucas. "Have you made a decision about Beatrice's offer?" Clara hesitated before typing a response. "Not yet. I don't trust her." The reply came quickly. "You're right not to, but there's more to her offer than she's letting on. Beatrice isn't just playing games, she's playing for survival." The message left Clara more confused than ever. What did Lucas mean by survival? Was Beatrice in trouble? And if so, why involve Clara? The questions multiplied, each one more unsettling than the last. The next morning, Clara arrived at the office to find another envelope on her desk. This time it contained a document, a confidential report from Beatrice's family business. The report detailed severe financial losses, the kind that could bring even the wealthiest dynasty to its knees. Along with it was a handwritten note. "Sometimes the only way out is through. Call me." Clara's pulse quickened as she stared at the note. Beatrice's offer was beginning to make sense. Her family's empire was crumbling, and she was desperate to bring in someone who could help stabilize it. But why Clara? Was it a genuine opportunity or a calculated move to exploit her growing reputation? By lunchtime, Clara couldn't focus. The whispers in the office, Evelyn's cryptic words, the anonymous threats, it all felt like a pressure cooker ready to explode. She decided to meet Lucas at a nearby cafe, hoping he could shed light on the situation. When she arrived, Lucas was already seated, his expression serious. "You're in deeper than you realize," he said as she sat down. "Beatrice doesn't make offers out of goodwill. She sees you as a tool, someone she can manipulate to save her family's reputation. Clara leaned forward, her voice low. Then why warn me? Why give me the chance to walk away? Because she knows you're smart enough to see the cracks in her facade, Lucas replied. But that doesn't mean she won't use you if it serves her purpose. Clara sat back, the weight of his words sinking in. She felt like a pawn in a game she didn't fully understand, a game where the stakes were higher than she had ever imagined. But even as fear threatened to consume her, a spark of defiance ignited within her. She wasn't the same woman who had been humiliated in that bistro months ago. She had fought too hard to let anyone control her now. "I won't be a pawn," Clara said, her voice steady. "If Beatrice thinks she can use me, she's going to learn otherwise." Lucas studied her for a moment before nodding. "Good, but be careful, Clara. This world, it's not forgiving." As she left the cafe, Clara's resolve hardened. She didn't know what lay ahead, but she knew one thing. She wouldn't let fear dictate her choices. The shadows around her were growing darker, but Clara was determined to face them head-on. The sound of heels clicking against polished marble echoed through the grand hall, blending with the hum of voices and the clinking of champagne glasses. Clara adjusted her dress, a sleek borrowed gown that hugged her figure, and stepped into the opulent ballroom. The air was heavy with the scent of expensive perfume and the unspoken competition of wealth and status. This was Beatrice's world, and tonight, Clara had been invited into it. The invitation had arrived unexpectedly, a handwritten note from Beatrice herself, insisting Clara attend an exclusive gala hosted by her family. Clara had hesitated, suspicious of the sudden gesture, but after days of deliberation, she decided to go, not for Beatrice, but for herself. If she wanted to understand the game she was being drawn into, she needed to see the players up close. As she entered the room, Clara felt the weight of dozens of eyes appraising her. Whispers followed her like a shadow, speculation rippling through the crowd. She held her head high, her confidence bolstered by the knowledge that she had earned her place here, not through privilege, but through grit and determination. Beatrice appeared moments later, gliding through the crowd with practiced ease. Her smile was warm, almost genuine, as she approached Clara. "You came," she said, her tone a mixture of surprise and satisfaction. "You gave me little choice," Clara replied, her voice steady. Beatrice laughed softly. "I admire your spirit, Clara. You don't back down, do you?" Clara didn't respond, her gaze unwavering. She knew better than to trust Beatrice's charm, but she couldn't deny the allure of her confidence. It was a reminder of what Clara was striving for, not wealth, but the ability to stand tall in any room. As the evening unfolded, Clara found herself navigating a labyrinth of introductions and conversations. The guests were a mix of powerful executives, socialites, and influencers, each more polished and calculated than the last. Clara observed them carefully, noting how money seemed to flow through their lives effortlessly, shaping their decisions and shielding them from consequences. It wasn't long before she noticed the undercurrent of tension in the room. Whispers about Beatrice's family business grew louder as the night went on, hints of scandal woven into the fabric of polite conversation. Clara caught fragments of dialogue, words like losses, lawsuits, and restructuring. It was clear that the facade of perfection was beginning to crack. "Enjoying yourself?" Beatrice's voice broke through Clara's thoughts. She had reappeared at her side, her expression unreadable. "It's enlightening," Clara replied carefully. Beatrice studied her for a moment before leaning in closer. "Walk with me." Clara hesitated but followed, weaving through the crowd until they reached a quiet corner of the room. Beatrice gestured for Clara to sit, her usual air of control slipping just enough to reveal a flicker of vulnerability. "My family is on the brink," Beatrice admitted, her voice low. "The empire my father built is crumbling, and no one knows how to stop it." Clara remained silent, unsure of what to say. Beatrice's admission was both unexpected and calculated, a move that felt like an attempt to humanize herself, or perhaps to manipulate Clara further. "I brought you here because I need people I can trust," Beatrice continued. "People who understand what it means to fight for their place in the world. You have potential, Clara, more than you realize." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Clara's mind raced, her instincts screaming that this was a pivotal moment. Beatrice was offering her a seat at the table, but at what cost? Clara had worked tirelessly to distance herself from this kind of power dynamic, yet the temptation was undeniable. "Why me?" Clara asked finally. "You could have chosen anyone." Beatrice's gaze softened, a rare glimpse of sincerity breaking through her polished exterior. "Because you remind me of myself. Before all of this." The admission caught Clara off guard, stirring a mix of empathy and skepticism. She could see the cracks in Beatrice's armor now, the strain of holding together a life built on unstable foundations. But even as she recognized the humanity in Beatrice, Clara couldn't ignore the danger of aligning herself with someone so deeply entrenched in a world of corruption and deceit. "I need to think about it," Clara said, her voice steady but firm. Beatrice nodded, a faint smile playing on her lips. "Take your time, but don't wait too long. This world moves fast, Clara, and hesitation can cost you everything." As Clara left the gala that night, the city lights stretched before her, blurring into a kaleidoscope of possibilities and pitfalls. Beatrice's offer lingered in her mind, its implications impossible to ignore. Clara was no longer the invisible waitress she had once been, but the path she was on felt more precarious than ever. Each step forward seemed to come with higher stakes, and Clara knew that one wrong move could send everything she had built crashing down. The sharp buzz of Clara's phone jolted her awake. The morning light filtered through her curtains, casting long shadows across her apartment. She grabbed the phone from her nightstand, her heart skipping a beat when she saw the notification. It was an email from an anonymous sender, the subject line reading, "This is your warning." Her fingers trembled as she opened it. Inside was a single sentence, "You're being watched. Choose wisely." Attached was a photograph of her leaving the gala the night before, Beatrice visible at her side. Clara's breath caught in her throat. Someone was tracking her movements, and they wanted her to know it. She stared at the screen, her mind racing. Who was behind this? Evelyn? Beatrice? Or someone else entirely? The web of intrigue surrounding her life had tightened, leaving Clara with a sinking realization. She was a pawn in a game far more dangerous than she had imagined. Later that day, Clara sat in her office, trying to focus on the tasks in front of her. But the words from the email echoed in her mind, clouding her thoughts. When Lucas appeared at her desk, his expression concerned, she felt a flicker of relief. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said quietly. Clara hesitated before showing him the email. Lucas's brow furrowed as he read it, his usual calm replaced by a grim seriousness. "This isn't a joke," he said. "Someone is trying to intimidate you." "But why?" Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do they want from me?" Lucas leaned in, his voice low. "You're in the middle of something bigger than you realize. Beatrice's world isn't just about money and status. It's about control, and someone doesn't want you getting too close to it." The weight of his words sank in as Clara considered her next move. She had worked too hard to let fear dictate her decisions, but the stakes were higher than ever. If she walked away now, she could protect herself, but at what cost? The thought of returning to a life of invisibility, of being defined by her limitations, was unbearable. Over the next few days, Clara threw herself into her work, determined to maintain a sense of normalcy. But the tension in the office was palpable. Evelyn's behavior grew more erratic, her thinly veiled hostility giving way to outright sabotage. On more than one occasion, Clara found her projects mysteriously delayed or altered, forcing her to stay late to fix the issues. One evening, as Clara reviewed a presentation, she noticed something strange in the data. A series of transactions listed under a client's account didn't add up. Digging deeper, she uncovered a pattern of discrepancies, money being funneled through shell companies tied to Beatrice's family. Clara's stomach churned as the implications became clear. This wasn't just financial mismanagement, it was fraud. She considered her options carefully. Reporting the issue could expose her to retaliation, but staying silent would make her complicit. Clara decided to confront the one person who might have answers: Beatrice. Meeting Beatrice in a private lounge at an upscale hotel, Clara wasted no time. "I found something," she said, sliding a folder across the table. "Care to explain?" Beatrice's expression remained calm as she flipped through the documents. "You've been busy," she said, her tone neutral. "This isn't just about your family's business, is it?" Clara pressed. "Someone's using you, using me as part of something much bigger." Beatrice closed the folder and met Clara's gaze. "You're right," she said finally, "but you're wrong about one thing. I'm not a victim in this, I'm a player." Clara's heart sank. She had hoped for clarity, for some reassurance that she wasn't walking into a trap. Instead, Beatrice's admission confirmed her worst fears. "I brought you into this because I saw potential in you," Beatrice continued. "But potential doesn't come without risk. If you want out, I won't stop you. But if you stay, you need to understand what you're getting into." Clara sat back, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. Walking away would mean safety, but it would also mean abandoning the progress she had fought so hard to achieve. Staying meant facing danger head-on, but it also offered the chance to rewrite her story on her own terms. As she left the lounge, Clara's thoughts were a whirlwind. She didn't trust Beatrice, but she couldn't ignore the opportunity she presented. The shadows around Clara were growing darker, but her resolve was stronger than ever. She wouldn't let fear or manipulation define her choices. If she was going to play this game, she would do it on her own terms, and she would win. The rain battered against the window of Clara's apartment as she sat at her desk, the flickering light of her laptop casting shadows on the walls. The documents she had uncovered from Beatrice's family business were spread across the surface, their implications gnawing at her. She had spent hours piecing together the puzzle, each connection revealing a network of corruption and deceit. The stakes were higher than she had imagined, and Clara felt the weight of her decision bearing down on her. Her phone buzzed, and the name Lucas Grant appeared on the screen. She answered quickly, her voice tense. "I found something big." "I figured as much," Lucas replied, his tone measured. "We need to meet." They arranged to meet at a quiet cafe on the edge of the city, a neutral ground away from prying eyes. When Clara arrived, Lucas was already seated, a stack of papers in front of him. His usual calm demeanor was replaced with an air of urgency. "What do you have?" Clara asked, sliding into the seat across from him. Lucas pushed the papers toward her. "Proof that Beatrice's family isn't just in financial trouble. They're in legal trouble. This goes beyond simple fraud. They're tied to money laundering, offshore accounts, and some very dangerous people." Clara scanned the documents, her stomach sinking with each revelation. The intricate web of transactions and shell companies was overwhelming, but one thing was clear. Beatrice's family wasn't just at risk of losing their fortune. They were at risk of losing their freedom. "Why are you helping me with this?" Clara asked, her eyes narrowing. "What's your stake in all of this?" Lucas hesitated before answering, his expression somber. "Because I've been where you are. Pulled into a world I didn't understand, used as a pawn for someone else's gain. I see myself in you, Clara, and I don't want you to make the same mistakes I did." Clara leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. Lucas's words resonated, but they didn't diminish the danger she was in. She was in too deep now, and walking away felt impossible. If she wanted to protect herself, she needed to take control of the situation. That evening, Clara made a decision. She contacted Beatrice and requested a meeting, her tone firm and unwavering. Beatrice agreed, her curiosity evident. They met in a private room at an exclusive club, the atmosphere tense with unspoken truths. "I know everything," Clara said, sliding the folder of documents across the table. "The fraud, the laundering, the offshore accounts, all of it." Beatrice's expression didn't falter, but Clara saw the flicker of panic in her eyes. "You've been busy," Beatrice said, her voice cold. "This isn't a game anymore," Clara continued. "You brought me into this because you thought you could use me. But I'm not a pawn. If you want my help, it has to be on my terms." Beatrice studied Clara for a moment before leaning back in her chair, a faint smile playing on her lips. "You've surprised me, Clara. I didn't think you had it in you." "I'm not here to impress you," Clara replied. "I'm here to survive. And if that means taking you down, I will." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Beatrice's smile faded, replaced with a steely determination. "You think you've won, but you have no idea what you're up against. This world doesn't reward honesty, Clara. It rewards power." "I don't need power," Clara said, her voice steady. "I just need the truth." As Clara left the club, she felt a surge of clarity. She had faced Beatrice head-on and refused to back down, but the battle was far from over. The truth she sought was buried deep, and the forces against her were formidable. Yet Clara knew one thing for certain. She was no longer the same woman who had been humiliated in that bistro months ago. She was stronger, sharper, and more determined than ever. The storm around her was growing, but Clara was ready to face it head-on. The grand hall was silent, except for the faint hum of the projector as Clara stood at the podium, her reflection shimmering on the polished floor beneath her. The spotlight bathed her in a warm glow, but her expression was steady, her presence commanding. She faced a sea of faces, executives, journalists, and stakeholders gathered for the conference that would change everything. The room was charged with anticipation. Beatrice sat near the front, her posture rigid, her expression unreadable. Clara had spent weeks preparing for this moment, her path riddled with threats and revelations that had pushed her to the edge. But tonight wasn't just about exposing the truth, it was about reclaiming her narrative. Clara clicked to the first slide of her presentation. "The story you're about to hear isn't just about numbers or finances. It's about choices, consequences, and the power of integrity in a world where deception often prevails." The audience leaned in, captivated by her calm authority. Clara spoke with precision, weaving together the evidence she had painstakingly gathered. The fraudulent dealings of Beatrice's family were laid bare. Accounts, transactions, offshore entities, all of it connected by an intricate web of deceit. Gasps rippled through the room as Clara unveiled the extent of the corruption. But she didn't stop there. With each slide, she shared not just the crimes, but the consequences for those who had been hurt. The small businesses crushed under unfair competition, the employees who had lost pensions, the communities left in economic ruin. "This isn't just about one family," Clara continued, her voice unwavering. "It's about the systems that allow this to happen. The real question is, how do we stop it?" The room was silent as her words sank in. Clara paused, scanning the audience before delivering the final blow. Integrity is the currency of the future, and the choice to value it starts here, with all of us. As the last slide faded to black, Clara stepped away from the podium. The audience erupted into applause, but her focus remained on Beatrice. Their eyes met, and for a moment, Beatrice's mask of composure slipped. There was no defiance, no anger, only resignation. Later, as the crowd dispersed, Beatrice approached Clara. "You've made your point," she said quietly, "but don't think this is the end." Clara met her gaze, her expression resolute. "It's the end of your games. The rest is up to you." Walking out of the venue, Clara felt an unfamiliar sense of peace. The path she had taken was treacherous, but it had led her here, to a place where she had proven, not to others, but to herself, that she was capable of more than she had ever imagined. Turning to the camera crew waiting outside, Clara allowed herself a small smile. "What did you think of the journey? If you've ever faced impossible odds or felt underestimated, share your story. I'd love to hear how you overcame it." As the night deepened, the city lights sparkled like stars, and for the first time in a long while, Clara felt free. Her story wasn't over, but she was finally the author of her own narrative. And that, she realized, was the greatest victory of all.